Hi, everyone, and welcome again to GaudiumEtSpes22.com, Podbean podcast, and YouTube video, my podcast. Today is actually Wednesday, the 27th of November, the day before Thanksgiving. I don't know when this is going to get posted. Maybe Thanksgiving Day, maybe the day after, but the day before Thanksgiving. And it's an appropriate time to have this conversation because the holidays are often a time of depression for many people, a time when grief and loss and other forms of depression kick in to hurt people. And so today I'm joined by one of my dearest friends in the entire world, Mr. Marcus Daly. And I'm going to let Marcus explain who he is in more detail. But for the reasons as to why, there's so many reasons why I wanted to do this podcast. By the way, first, hi, Marcus. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Larry. Great to see you this morning.
Great for being here today. But to set this up, Marcus and I are both members of St. Thomas More Parish in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Thomas More Parish is the Anglican ordinariate parish in our area. Beautiful, wonderful parish. Father Eric Bergman, wonderful pastor. And Marcus and I have become very close friends since he moved here from Vashon Island near Seattle in Washington State and has relocated to Scranton. But Marcus owns Marian Caskets, which is a ministry that he has started. He started it out on Vashon Island, and he still has a workshop there. But he's also got this wonderful new workshop. You can see somewhat in the background behind him right now in Scranton, PA, about 1 block away from our church. So I wanted to talk to him today about the casket ministry, and he and I have done podcasts before under the title Die Human, so some of you may already be familiar with him, but we also want to talk today about other things going on in our parish, which is one of the reasons why I'm kind of excited about this conversation, and that it's sort of much delayed and we maybe should have done it sooner, to talk about all the exciting things going on in our parish. So anyway, welcome to the show, Marcus.
It's great to be here, Larry. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed your podcast many times, and now here I am
And now here
on
you
it.
are. All right. And we can see in the background that the sort of back end, the end of many of your caskets, which are simple pine. No, not pine.
These ones are oak, but I make them
Yeah.
out of pine and oak. But these are out of beautiful Pennsylvania hardwood forests, very close by, a sawmill very close by, with just gorgeous oak wood that I've been able to get. So that's what's behind me here.
And I have seen these caskets up close and personal. They're beautiful. I plan myself someday to be planted in the soil
No
in
rush.
one of in one, yeah, hopefully no rush. But as we can see, I want to point out at the end of these caskets, you have Jesus, I trust in you, which is obviously a reference to the divine mercy revelations to Sister Faustina from our Lord. And so there is a divine mercy connection. So to your casket making. So let's back up just a bit so that everybody knows who is Marcus Daly, and how did you get from Vashon Island, Seattle, Washington, to, well, you're originally from what, Chester County
Yeah, I'm
in
originally from
Pennsylvania.
southeastern PA, and here we are up in Nipa.
NEPA, northeastern PA, NEPA, as the locals call it. But anyway, so what in brief, to explain to the viewers what led you not only to become the craftsman of wonderful, simple wooden coffins, but how this actually then became a kind of ministry to the parish and to the broader Catholic world.
So I hadn't really had much experience with woodworking or anything growing up, other than I had a grandfather who I never met. He died decades before I was born. But my grandmother lived with us, and she had this old set of tools, his old toolbox, which were very rusty. But I was kind of fascinated with them. But my dad wasn't in the picture. Not that people were more academic in my family anyway, so it wasn't. I wouldn't have learned carpentry from my father had he been around. But there was this old toolbox, and I used to take the saws and things out of there and try to cut woods. I was a little curious about how to put things together, but they were very old and rusty. So from the age of like 10, when I tried to cut a 2x4 with a rusty saw, to about 22, I didn't really do any woodworking because it took me about 3 hours to cut through one 2x4. And I thought, well, carpentry is not for me, between my 10-year-old body and the rusty saw. And then I started just making some little odds and ends when I actually went out to Alaska when I was 22. I worked in the fishing industry a little bit in a cannery, and it got me interested in working with my hands a little bit more. I mean, cleaning fish isn't quite the same as working with your hands, but I like the satisfaction that came from doing an obvious job and getting the immediate payoff of job well done, as opposed to more of an academic bent, which I was not very good at because I couldn't sit still. Um, and so when I was 24, I moved out west and I started working in the commercial fishing industry up in Alaska. And I started working on fishing boats and fixing them up a little bit and working more with my hands. And then I learned marine carpentry and I met my wife. We started a landscaping business. And we had hoped when we started our family, when we moved from Seattle out to Vashon Island, to begin making little wooden boats for people as that would be my career, that we would just be out there with our one daughter, maybe two children, and building little wooden boats. But it turns out it takes a long time to build a little wooden boat, and not a lot of people want to pay $20,000 for a 10-foot boat. So we went back to our landscaping business. And then Pope John Paul II's funeral happened in 2005. And we were both really taken by that and by his simple wooden casket there amidst the grandeur of St. Peter's Square. And so that kind of stuck in the back of my mind. This we had this dream of building these certain type of vessels, and it kind of percolated for a while. And then I went to Kelly with this idea one day that maybe we could build caskets like Pope John Paul II's. And for some strange reason, she thought that sounded like a good idea, which is not the average reaction of the average woman, I wouldn't think, to that proposition. But actually, she'd already said yes to the even more unusual proposition, which is marrying me in the first place. So I guess she's game for unusual propositions. So we started in 2009 is when we started actually trying to make the caskets. And for a while, I didn't know anything about the funeral industry or how any of that worked. I just thought I'd make environmentally friendly caskets in the Pacific Northwest, and I'd take them to funeral directors, and they'd say, "This is so great. There's a local guy doing this," but they just closed the door in my face and said, "We buy them from a giant manufacturer elsewhere for very little money, and we sell them for what we sell them for, and you're not a part of this." And I had actually already sold my landscaping business, so this was a terrible kind of wake up call that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but we were in it. Um, so what I did was, for a year or two, I would give the caskets to families, especially families who had lost children in miscarriage or due to illness. And then my faith was strong by that point, very strong in our family. Kelly had converted to Catholicism. We added many more children than we ever expected to. We had
Just
five
for
children.
how many children do you have altogether, Marcus?
We have 8 on terra firma, and God has 3 in his care. Um, and so, with the faith aspect of it, and obviously dealing with death, this wasn't my idea. Was I would kind of go to the environmental, the greenies, and say, and kind of make this an entree into talking about the faith, because we'd be dealing with death, but I'd be presenting it in an environmentally friendly way, and then maybe I could introduce, the sort of crunchy Catholicism into it, of like Pope John Paul II and his simplicity, and naked we come into this world and naked we go out of that. And I thought it might even be a chance to evangelize in some way to people who thought there was some sort of like division between being an environmentalist and being a Christian, this kind of strange uh, tension that seems to exist. I don't know why. I mean, you as the owner of the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker Farm kind of in some ways are also bridging that divide. But it wasn't to be, because everybody just wanted to have their body cremated and have their ashes scattered in Puget Sound or on Mount Rainier. But the faith that was coming through, and thinking about death, and thinking about this sorrow, and thinking about the weight that families were experiencing amidst this loss, and just the crisis of our mortality, had God's mercy, just me thinking about his mercy, his mercy, his mercy, his mercy for me, because that was a big part of my conversion too, was really just having an understanding of God's mercy in my own life. And that cracked me open. So I had only heard about the Divine Mercy devotion fairly recently. I never heard about it growing up. But I thought, if there's one thing that the caskets could really speak to, it would be God's merciful love. And so I started carving these prayers, the Divine Mercy prayers of Holy God, Holy Mighty One, Holy Immortal One, have mercy on us in the sides. And Jesus, I trust in you on the ends and in the handles, as a way just of making the faith of the hope that we have in God's mercy front and center for people at their funerals. And that's been the difference that my caskets are from others, other than the
Yeah.
fact that they're handmade and everything. It's just that they really proclaim God's merciful love and merely make sure that we give faith the last word in our funerals. So that's what we were doing on Vashon Island. And we did that for 12 years. And I was shipping them all around the country because, the Northwest isn't exactly the epicenter of Catholicism in the United States. And if you're going to think of, I'm going to start a manufacturing business, and you're looking at a map of the United States, you probably wouldn't think, how about way up here in the corner? In fact, let's be on an island in the corner, an island that's only accessible by ferry boat, and then we'll ship them around the country. That wouldn't be a very good planning for how to start a national manufacturing business.
Yeah.
So, but we were making it work. And then COVID hit, and the shipping got a lot more complicated because a lot of places were closing down. A lot of the airports that I'd been flying into were no longer accepting a large item to come in this way. So Kelly and I had actually, my wife Kelly and I had been pondering an East Coast move for a few years, because of my family being here. My mom was getting older; she died during COVID, and then I had my uncle, who you knew, who was in Virginia. Kelly has an uncle in Virginia. My brother was in Pennsylvania. So we're kind of feeling as years were going by, feeling the distance from home. But then during COVID, I mean, I had been reading Gaudium et Spes 22 with a friend of mine who was also a farmer, Catholic farmer on Vashon Island, and we've been enjoying it. And then we heard about St. Thomas More and the Ordinariate Parish from your blog. And so I looked it up, and I saw that there was a little school there, and we homeschool. But we had, as the kids were getting older, we were feeling like we were getting tired. So I looked into it, saw that there was a school there, and I reached out to the school administrator just with like just a cursory question, a threshold question, I guess, of could you just tell me something about it? And I got an email back almost instantly saying, "Oh, I saw your email address. You make caskets. Our pastor's youngest son has died, and they need a casket, and we would like you to make a casket." So we went from like this kind of just inquiry to like, oh, there's a family here that needs a casket. And Father Bergman asked me to carve a quote from St. Peter Damian on the top, which was, the best penance is to have patience with the sorrows God permits. And it just drew us into kind of a deep connection from across the country with this family as we were building the casket and praying for the Bergmans. And then that led us into trying to discern, well, maybe this is the place on the East Coast that God is calling us to. And Kelly had actually been familiar with Scranton. This is a strange thing, but she was looking at, we had a son who was interested in becoming a pilot. He hasn't gone down that path, but she was like, are there any Catholic colleges that teach aviation? And there actually is one in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Marywood University has an aviation program. So Kelly was like, well, I've been thinking about Scranton. I was like, you've been thinking about Scranton? And it wasn't because of The Office. We've never seen The Office. People say, you're the only people I know who've never seen The Office, and you're moving to Scranton. And then they say, maybe that's why you're moving to Scranton. Anyway, so we discerned that, yeah, maybe we could move here and start a shop here, sort of sight unseen. And I had my uncle who he was starting to have some health issues, and I was hoping he would move in with us and we could care
Yes,
for him also
I
for,
knew your uncle. I knew your
yeah,
uncle. He and I went to seminary together. Small
yeah,
world.
it is a small world. But let's make it bigger. We need to make it bigger as Catholics.
That's right.
But so we packed up, and 6 of our 8 kids, 2 of them were out of the house. We moved cross country. We found a place in Scranton. We didn't even have a shop space. Made it work with a little bit of space here and a little bit of space there. And that was kind of the way it went for the first couple of years here. But we integrated into the community. Kids were going to the school, Maria Calpas Academy, and we just kept our eyes open and kept looking for a place where we could set up the shop. And of all things, right across the street here, like you said, a block, less than a block away, really, this shop space opened up that was an old automotive garage. Took a lot of work fixing it up, but now we have this wonderful shop space right here, which is across the street. So I can start the day with mass right there. If I get a call from a family that's dealing with something especially difficult, or an individual is dealing with something especially difficult, Jesus is right there. The church is right there. So I could just take it over and lay it before him. And then crazily in God's wonderful, crazy way, next door to us, well, first of all, directly next door to us is a little cemetery right next door to my shop.
That's
So no
right.
excuse
Yeah.
not to get that plenary
The
indulgence on the All Souls Day.
the Van Storks.
Storch.
Storch. Yeah,
Yeah, the
not Storks.
Von
The Von
Storch.
Storches. It's all big
Yeah.
Von Storch money over there. Yeah.
Yeah, so a prominent mining family had this little plot that they actually used as a cemetery, which is right next to the shop here. And then on the other side of that was an old funeral home, right? And that old funeral home um, went up for sale a year and a half ago. And another ministry had grown out of St. Thomas More Parish, which was the Providence Pregnancy Center, started by Jessica Frayne, caring for women in crisis and their babies and providing, material
Yeah.
needs for
Okay.
them
So
as
stop there.
counseling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely stop there because this is, we don't want to overload the listeners with too much information too
Okay.
quickly. So we've got Marian Caskets, which I will put in the program notes under description in the YouTube video. In this, I'll put in the web link so people can go to Marian Caskets. You do have a web page, right? So
Is that a little dig on my technological
well,
ineptitude?
we're both a
Yes, we
couple
have
of
a website.
Luddites.
We have for
Yes.
15 years.
I will post that so people can go and know everything they need to know about Marian Caskets and get a good view of the caskets and what's involved in the ministry and so on. But then also I will put in I hope I can link to a video that a parishioner friend of ours, Becky Huffman, the pastor's sister, she sent to me a video of the Providence Pregnancy Center.
Yeah, it's great.
And that was, I think it was on EWTN. Was that what it was?
It was, yeah.
And it's a beautiful video. It tells Jessica Frayne's story a little bit more and the obstacles that she herself has had to overcome in life. And so this has just evolved into a beautiful part of our parish. We had a fundraiser last year, and I think didn't Jim Caviezel, the actor in The Passion of Christ, recently show up for a fundraiser?
Yeah, the last month, the last in October, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll try to get that video linked up that Becky Huffman sent me as well, so people can kind of get a sense of this. And just by way of background too, people need to understand it's called Providence Pregnancy Center because the neighborhood of Scranton, in which our parish is located, is the Providence neighborhood. It's what it's called, of Scranton. And Father Bergman likes to say, and I think it's true, that the zip code in which Providence resides is one of the poorest in all of Pennsylvania, one of the poorest areas. So it's not an upscale neighborhood that the parish is in or the pregnancy center is in, and that's actually by design. Father Bergman wanted the parish to be in a poorer neighborhood, which speaks highly of him as a pastor. And so there are other ministerial aspects. We've got Dr. Phil Huffman, Becky Huffman's husband, who is a doctor. He is my primary care physician and many people in the parish, and he offers his services almost completely free of charge to anybody in the parish that needs a doctor. Yeah. So there's just, and I'm probably missing. There's the Divine Mercy Farm run by Matt Nickel and his wife Jess. Yep. That raises food for the poor and for others and for the parish, which is an integral part of the parish. So anyway, I'm probably leaving things out, and I interrupted the flow of your conversation. But anyway, you may continue.
Thank you. Yeah, right. Yeah. So they raise food for the Providence Pregnancy Center, also the Divine Mercy Farm. Yeah. So which it's really beautiful. Good food, good healthy food. So yes, so that Jessica had started that out of the parish, and then they had rented a building that was a couple of blocks away. And then a year and a half ago, the building on the other side of this little cemetery here, so basically next door to my shop, which was a funeral home, which went out of business, they put it up for sale. The Providence Pregnancy Center did a bunch of fundraising. They raised the money, made a down payment, and purchased this funeral home. And they've transformed it into this pregnancy resource center to counsel women, to give away material needs. And then there's a separate apartment building, structure on it with, I think, 4 apartments that they're now raising money to refurbish so that there'll be actual maternity housing for pregnant women and for any children that they have, because there's no other place in the Scranton area that will both offer housing for a pregnant mom in crisis, as well if she has children. That's only for a pregnant mom. There's not a place that will house existing children also. So this is just incredible because it was a funeral home and now it's a pregnancy center. So they had that fundraiser the year last year, from death to life, which is just awesome because that's, of course,
Yeah.
that's the epitome of what Jesus did for us. Is he went to the grave so that we don't stay there. He brought us from death to life. And so that's kind of been an undercurrent of my work too with Marian Caskets, is that I'm trying to amplify the hope that Christ gives us so that we don't see the grave as a destination, but we see it as a pathway to, our salvation. And so there's just this confluence of what we're doing and what the PPC is doing, and that they would end up right next door. And then I'm raising money with my casket sales to support them, as well as helping out with our vehicles and stuff to help them deliver goods and do those kinds of things. So we have this good friendship as well as working together. And then just recently, I started I've had something called the Rose Fund, where sometimes there was a family, they had a daughter named Rose who died, and I always give caskets to family who lose children wherever I can. They insisted on paying. Um, and then at the end of that year, they actually made a sizable donation to Marian Caskets to allow me to make caskets for other families who'd lost a child. And
Kind
their
of
daughter's name was,
paying it forward.
yeah, and their daughter's name was Rose. So I called it the Rose Fund. And then I talked to Jessica and I said, because people have asked me if they could make tax deductible donations. And I'm not a nonprofit. I'm a woodworking business. But in partnership with the PPC now, they have opened up in a sub heading under their Providence Pregnancy Center, 501c3, the Rose Fund. It's actually called Mary's Rose Fund because the Rose Fund was taken. So I called it Mary's Rose Fund. She's the example par excellence of someone who dealt with the loss of a child. So through that now we can accept tax deductible donations also, so that we can increase our ability to provide caskets to families who've lost a child through miscarriage or through illness or through, which I just did increasingly, which is through suicide, which is becoming, more and
Yeah.
more of an epidemic in our culture, and we
Yeah.
have to push back on that.
Yeah, we'll come to. Oh, I hear some sirens going on outside. You are in
There
the
are some,
neighborhood, man.
there are, yeah.
We're going to come back to the issue of suicide in a second because it's very, very important. Uh, we both have had horrible experiences with this, but the fact is, let's go. I want to come back to the miscarriage thing. I mean, your own wife has had miscarriages. We've all known. I had a niece. I have a niece who now has 3 beautiful children, but she had one unborn child that passed away in utero, very, very close to her due date, actually. And that was a very traumatic, horrible experience for her. But the thing is, my point is this: is that in our abortion saturated culture, where it's considered just no big deal to terminate a pregnancy, I think one of the this is one way in which abortion is so very anti-woman on so many levels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it is that it diminishes the grief and the pain that a woman who has miscarried feels over the loss of their child. And the same with a husband, because nobody in our culture anymore considers it any big deal at all when a baby dies in utero and is then expelled and or removed or whatever. Oh yeah, okay, so you lost a child, you lost a fetus,
Yeah.
as it's called. No big deal.
Yeah.
But this is a huge part, I think, of your ministry, Marcus, that you do attempt to make for free caskets for people that have lost not just children in utero, but just young children in general.
Yeah, that was the first casket I made. Kelly's third pregnancy. We had she had a miscarriage, and so that
And
was
she almost
long before.
died, right? She almost died.
Well,
She
the
almost
second
bled.
one she had, she almost died. Yeah,
Yeah.
she did. She started to fade out, and I had to run and get a nurse, and they had to pump her with like 2 bags of saline solution because her blood pressure just dropped out.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, yeah, and that's that first casket was before that was years before a couple of years before Pope John Paul II had died too. It was just like, oh, I have to honor this life. I have to
Yeah.
there's not much
Yeah.
I can do, but I have to do everything I can just to show that this is a significant. This is one of our family members we're not going to see here. So how do we care for the little short bodily existence that this baby had? And so that definitely it would that was really stirred it up. I would say. I mean, Kelly, I think she had just become Catholic, or she was just about to become Catholic. But I've seen this again and again, Larry, is this issue, which like we almost are some squeamish of talking about sometimes as Catholics, like, oh, we don't want to wade into the culture war or whatever it is. But like with Kelly, it was realizing that like she didn't believe partial birth abortion was a real thing. Like she was like, no, there's no way. She was pro-choice. She was just your modern girl thinking the way modern girls are supposed to think.
Yeah.
And when she was confronted with the reality of like partial birth abortion, she couldn't believe that existed. And so when we lost that baby, it was just like, yeah, this isn't based on feelings. We just lost a baby. It's not like, well, if we want the baby, that's sad. And if we don't want the baby, then that's good or whatever. Like this can't coexist. There is reality. So yeah, when I think that many times, I mean, I don't know how many dozens, 100, I don't know, caskets I've given to families who've had a miscarriage. They're just like so grateful that this acknowledgement is made. And there's wonderful pastors, there's good priests who will really honor that too. But I think even for priests, sometimes it's this uncomfortable thing because the enemy has like just created this conversation around like, well, it's really not. It really depends whether this is sad or not, whether this is tragic or not. And so like we almost have to gauge, well, is this a bad thing? Is this a good thing? Like, no, as a Catholic Church, as people who believe in the unity of body and soul and in the sacredness of life and that it begins at conception, we have to do a much better job in our parishes, especially, and then to the wider community. And that's a great witness too, to the wider community of honoring the life that exists, no matter how short. Because think about it. Okay, a baby only lives 20 weeks in utero. And, I live to be 56 if I die today. Um, in eternity, can you see the difference between 20 weeks and 56? The impact that baby maybe had on that family, the way that heart was changed, like with Kelly, and I was going to talk about some other friends too, who like when my friend Rebecca started to experience motherhood and become a mother, and she had been like a sociology major at a liberal New England arts or New England liberal arts little college where she was like, indoctrinated with the freedom of, bodily autonomy. And when she just actually felt that change and embraced it, like she became Catholic and she was so anti-Catholic, she threw her husband's catechism out the window when I was talking to him about the Catholic faith into the mud. But the depth of her maternal love for her children and her recognition of her body working properly and what it meant to nurture life and all those things like that, there's a catechesis, a bodily catechesis that like it just unfolds naturally in the family. And so it's no wonder, I guess, that people have to work, hammer and tongs to try to push back and obfuscate and distract us from the reality of just the simple truths of life and death and the value of the human
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, one of the things I got, and I don't like to delve into politics too much. People know my politics, and I'm not a huge pro-Trump guy by any means or anything. But one of the things that struck me in the last election was how it just went unchallenged, frequently unchallenged. That the mainstream media, in their analysts and opinion making and their reporting, would say that the election of Donald Trump represented the triumph of misogyny, and it wasn't just because Kamala Harris was a woman and she didn't win. There was the implication that if you support Trump, you are a misogynist, just even if he was running against a pro-choice Tim Walz sort of candidate. A vote for Trump is still a vote for misogyny. And so what it boils down to is this: what was being equated in the last election was, if you support the overturning of Roe v. Wade, if you support the Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court, you are by definition a misogynist, and because you are opposed to abortion. And that, by definition, is contrary to women's interests and women's rights. The very easy association with prenatal homicide with women's rights is what really struck me. And there was very little pushback to that narrative. And yet almost half of American women voted for Donald Trump, which means that almost half of American women were voting against their own interests, according to this narrative. But what you've just described, Marcus, is exactly why that narrative is incorrect, and that why we as men should not feel squeamish about speaking out against abortion, because we know, like, my wife is pro-life, your wife is pro-life. We know exactly why that narrative is wrong, that pro-choice equals being in favor of women.
And it's why people have to shout it at you so loud. They have to get in your face and shout it at you to scramble your brain, because you're like thinking, well, I don't want to be a jerk, I'm overwhelmed, but like just a little bit of space, a little bit of deep breath, and you're like, wait a minute, this is horrible. There's people in our neighborhood who had a sign up that said something like, vote like your daughter's life depends on it. And I think the subtext of that was like, because if the Republicans get in office, she's going to die of like a botched abortion or miscarriage, or like there's all, it's not even clear. You can't even say it clearly. You have to say it in broad.
She'll bleed out in a parking lot like that woman did in wherever it was. Yeah.
What about I vote like my granddaughter's life depends on
it? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Your granddaughter's life depends on it, because she might be the next victim of abortion. This is the fact too. How many female fetuses, so-called fetuses, are aborted? It's just, once again, the assumption is that the question of the moral status of the unborn is not pertinent to this conversation. Yeah. You are, by definition, a misogynist if you want to talk about that at all. And of course, part and parcel of this conversation, to bring it back to our main conversation, is that pro-life people don't care about children once they're born. Pro-life people don't care about women who are in crisis pregnancies. Pro-life people are just a bunch of religious zealots who are single-minded ideologues who don't care about women. And yet here we have the Providence Pregnancy Center in our parish that gives the lie to that. And of course, when Kamala Harris was Attorney General, and then you see allies of hers in places like New York State, if they had their way, the Providence Pregnancy Center would be shut down.
Is that right? They were that clinic. Stringent?
Well, yeah. Well, in New York State, who's the governor of New York? Hochul, whatever her name is. Yeah. The governor, she wanted to and advocated that her attorney general shut down these kinds of crisis pregnancy centers on the grounds that they're fake clinics,
the same thing.
They're fake clinics because they present themselves as pregnancy centers, and yet they don't offer abortions. So how can you be a pregnancy center that's not offering abortions? It's deceptive. You lure psychologically vulnerable women into your little pro-life web, into your little religious nexus, and then you get them in your clutches, all right, and force them to give birth through various psychological manipulations. Whereas a real pregnancy center will immediately send the person to Planned Parenthood to abort the fetus and so on, abort the child. I mean, so that's once again to bring it back to the past election. Like I said, I'm not a huge pro-Trump guy, but there were, and this is a shot against the Austin Ivories of the Catholic Church and the Massimo Fagioli's of the Catholic Church, and other people like National Catholic Reporter, hammering away at Catholics who voted for Trump as racist, misogynist, xenophobes, or whatever, completely ignoring the fact that if you were a Catholic who was this rabid supporter of Kamala Harris, you have to explain why it is you don't have blood on your hands for supporting the suppression of crisis pregnancy centers, for supporting the maintenance of Roe v. Wade, and so on. It's very clear they don't care about unborn human life. It's very clear that they don't.
And it seems like a crack can't even be given. Like a crack can't be given in a
yes.
conversation. Somebody has to shout in your face. A crack can't be given in college as far as a girl like having an honest debate in a class about pro-life versus pro-choice. A crack can't be given by allowing somebody to go to a crisis pregnancy center and have a conversation about how they might actually be able to care for that child or to offer the child up for adoption. Like, you can't even crack the door. That's how right and true and good and beautiful human life is that like there's just not enough that people who are opposed to it, that Satan himself, it has to just shut people up, shut people down, offer no alternatives, because life is beautiful and people given a chance and some sanity and some space and some hope will fight for it.
I know. Now we have a situation in the UK, in the United Kingdom, where people are being sent to jail for praying silently across the street from an abortion clinic. Just all they have to do is stand across the street from an abortion clinic with their heads bowed as if they're praying. That is against the law, and you can be sanctioned for that. Meanwhile, here in the United States, a crisis pregnancy center, which takes no government money, is utterly private, run by under religious auspices. And the last time I checked, there is a First Amendment right to freedom of religion. These are threatened with being shut down by various governmental people, all right, in liberal states on the grounds of pro-choice, on the grounds that, we're in favor of choice, except
here's the choice.
Here's the one choice. The box of your choice has been pre-checked for your convenience. Okay, it's like an old election in the Soviet Union where there was one candidate on the ballot. We had elections. We allowed people to vote, and it was Stalin all the way down. So there you go.
Well, so one of the things with the and honoring the baby's life in a miscarriage and having just a simple but beautiful little wooden casket too, it can open up some hearts, some hearts that might go because, well, that's my sister or that's my friend and they're having a funeral or they're going to bury the baby, at the cemetery. So we should go and we should support her. Like, again, it's just a little crack. It's like, okay, well, here's a physical thing that's beautiful, that people are crying over, that people are feeling a loss. So somebody who maybe is pro-choice or, not really considered it because they're just following what they've been told is the proper line, goes and sees that. And again, it can open hearts, and it can get people talking and thinking about things. So it's a less confrontational, than holding a sign or whatever it is. Everybody has the body has many parts and different people have different paths. But this has been the opportunity that God has given us to witness to the sanctity of human life in just a simple but beautiful way that involves some craftsmanship, that involves some effort, that involves some love, that is not an argument.
Well, it's so true. I mean, that's why it is so. People would say, well, what does casket making and the ministry associated with it have to do with the pro-life cause? It has everything to do with it. To use a much shop-worn cliche, the circle of life. I mean, you have a coffin shop right next to our pro-life pregnancy center, and both serve the ministry of the church. You try to give it to the extent that you are able, free coffins to those who have suffered the loss of a child or due to miscarriage, which is, like you just said, your way of affirming human life. But the fact is that in our Catholic faith, life and death are related issues.
Yeah.
Our coming into existence and our going hence into the next world are deeply and profoundly. I love what you said earlier. Whether a child is miscarried at, say, 5 months, or you live to be 103 and die, compared with eternity and the transition to eternity, life is this real short continuum from conception to natural death. And your ministry gives witness to that continuum in so many ways.
Yeah, it's a pilgrimage. This is a pilgrimage that we're on for however long we're granted. And really, you like you said, circle of life, but also just, I mean, as we kind of continue to try to fight death with our technological advances and everything, like it's really our limitations. That's really where we come into contact with God. If they're like
Yeah.
it's the fact that we're going to die. I mean, in a very real way, that is going to be our pathway to life with God, eternal life with Him. But in every other, even in just our day to day, our limitations and our frustrations and our feeling like we can't do everything we want to do, the humility we get from that and the need we feel in that leads us to reach out to God. So it's a constant thing. Like the idea that somehow pushing suffering aside, pushing hardship aside, pushing sacrifice aside is going to make us happier. Turns out, how many times do we have to prove that that's not true?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And you know, the fact is that dealing with those who are grieving at the loss of a loved one is a way of affirming life as well. And the deep connections that people make during life with their loved ones. And it leads me, you said earlier about how when you first started your casket ministry, you were naive and you didn't realize, when you went to the funeral directors, they would shut the door in your face because
Very gently, very
as
gently
you
slam
found
it.
out, I mean, a huge, huge, huge profit margin for the funeral homes in the selling of what I call the Cadillac coffins, the metal coffins lined with silk, and this coffin will allow your loved one to remain intact for 10,000 years, or whatever. That this is in many ways a callousness towards those who are grieving,
Yeah,
where you
and a
take
playing
it,
on fears.
you're playing on their fears, you're playing on their desire to respect. I mean, we are Catholics. We do believe in showing respect for the remains, our mortal
Yeah,
remains, because our bodies will be resurrected someday. Okay, we do show respect for that, and all that. But and so they play on that, and then charge you $10,000 for some bronze casket where your body's going to decay eventually at a time when a lot of people's, I mean, it's unless your loved one had, life insurance and so on, that's an enormous financial burden,
yeah,
a
yeah.
huge financial burden.
People will ask me, uh, like, will it? Because, like you said, with like the caskets that can kind of play on fears too, as far as like, but people ask me, will the his or her body, be preserved in this? And I say, no, it's wood, it returns to the earth. I said, but our hope isn't in a coffin. Our hope is in the resurrection, and so like
Yeah,
acknowledging that, like God has allowed this. Let's not forget that. We don't have to, again, just like what I was talking about, like in some ways, God defeated death with death. So
that's
our
right.
efforts to try to skirt, avoid, not confront death in some ways are a trick of the devil to keep us far enough back from the grave. Like the going to the grave, feeling the crisis of mortality and dealing with kind of the horror that we have to deal with of like, this isn't going to last. I'm going to have to endure this. That's a crisis that God meets us in. He comes into that. So in a lot of ways, all those things, it can be just business and that kind of stuff going on too. But in some ways, I think that the enemy uses those just to keep us from having that real crisis that comes from like the horror. It's an earthly horror. It's not an eternal horror. It's an earthly horror that God has allowed and entered into and destroyed from the inside as a pathway for us through it. But he meets us going down there. It's our humility, humility,
That's right.
humility that we need in order to have that relationship with God that then is the answer to our fears.
That's right.
It's not,
And I love
we
that.
don't
It's
buy our way out of
a
it.
great caveat. We all end up as dust. Remember, man, that you are dust, and unto dust you shall return. And there's no magic casket or embalming process. I mean, in other words, the Catholic teaching on the resurrection of the body means that we respect the mortal remains, but the idea that we therefore must try to figure out ever greater scientific means of mummifying the body and
Yeah.
preserving it for that day, that this is not a Catholic vision. And even though there is a connection between our mortal bodies and our resurrected bodies, theologically speaking, what that exact connection is remains mysterious, remains ambiguous. Paul says, the seed goes into the ground and dies and then
Right.
bears much fruit. Our bodies go into the ground and die and dissolve and will eventually resurrect. But what that is, what that looks like, what the connection is between our mortal remains is mysterious and ambiguous. And so, yeah, so there is the reason why I'm saying all this is that there's currently, I saw that in the Archdiocese of Chicago, they're now doing this. I believe maybe Scranton as well. There's a movement towards what are called green cemeteries.
Yeah.
Please explain that a little bit more, and how your wooden caskets actually play beautifully into the green cemetery idea.
Well, that was part of even when we began this was looking at that. And, that was 2009 when we started doing this. And, the internet, you never really know the scale of something on the internet. So on the internet, green cemeteries seemed like, and green funerals seemed like they were a big thing. But even on Vashon, which is a very crunchy sort of hippie part of the country, there were no green funerals. But I was just trying to okay, well, I'm going to make the caskets as simply as I can, because again, talking about what we were just talking about, like the seed going into like the simplicity, the naturalness
But
of
what is
returning
a
to
green?
earth.
What do they mean when they
Yeah.
say a green
Yeah.
funeral?
So what a green funeral is just so here's a conventional funeral these days is okay. There's a concrete vault that is at the cemetery that is in the ground. And that's there because then when the casket goes into it, the ground won't settle. And then it can look like a park the way most cemeteries look. So you have a concrete vault, then you have an embalmed body that goes into, like you're saying, like a metal casket. So an embalmed body and a metal casket in a concrete vault. That is a conventional funeral. With a green funeral, you have it's basically just tradition. It's basically just the way. It's kind of like natural foods. Well, it's just the way we made foods before we started putting all sorts of junk into them. So you've got a hole is dug in the ground, and then a wooden casket or a body in just a shroud goes in there, unembalmed, and just returns to the soil. So that all it is just like it's
Yeah.
150 years ago is what it is. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and in fact, I was just at one, sadly, talking about this, suicides, which I've experienced two in the last month of a friend who's in one case his wife, in another case his son. But when I was out in Washington just a couple of weeks ago, there was a funeral there, and they chose a green funeral. So that cemetery there now does have a space, and it's usually in the woods also. So like there's usually no headstone. There's more aspects to it. You could have like a small stone that's maybe just kind of a boulder or a natural stone from that environment. I guess you could have something etched in it, but usually it's more wooded section. And lots of my caskets have been used around the country in the various green cemeteries that there are. There's one in Conyers, Georgia. I think there's a monastery down there, and they have a green cemetery.
Yeah.
One was
Yeah.
used there. I had one that they even like had horses and a carriage drawing the casket, into the woods with the people walking into the woods, and then the hole was dug there. So that's it. It's just the way things have been done before we tried to
That's
improve
right.
on it.
I mean, I grew up in Nebraska. There are still old farmsteads, and you see right on the farm,
Yeah.
little picket fence around the family plot. All right. And the relatives would, or the father of the family would make the casket out of their,
Yeah.
and put the body directly in the ground with a wooden markers, with the person's name on it. And those little tiny rural cemeteries. I always joke with Carrie, my wife, that when I die, she should just dig a hole in the backyard of our farm and roll a boulder over it and spray paint Larry on the boulder, like
Just
you would
roll a
you just
boulder. That's a
yeah,
big ask.
like you when you bury your favorite dog, Leo, Maggie, Larry. All right, right here. That's a bit of a joke, but nevertheless, it, it's a way of reinforcing the fact what you just said. I mean, this was the normal way that people got buried up
Yeah.
until the advent of this once again, like so many things, this modern capitalist corporate thing called the American way of dying and burying became this massive corporate industry Uh,
Yeah. Now that
you
said,
know,
I guess in Europe and stuff, I mean, you have mausoleums and you have those kinds of things that have always existed I mean, you have the pyramids, you have things that have always existed to try to kind of, I guess there's so much of it again, is kind of the disposition of the
but
person
that was for
who,
the wealthy.
right, right. Yeah, it's
That was
true.
for the.
That was
I
to
mean,
try to status.
we don't all get the chance to have the Great Pyramid of Giza made
Well,
for.
you're asking Carrie to roll a big boulder. Why don't you just ask her to build a pyramid while you're at it?
Yeah,
And
maybe not quite the grandiose scale of the one at Giza on the Giza Plateau, but you bring up an interesting caveat. Go back to ancient Roman Greece. There were above ground burials, mausoleums, and they still exist, and so on. But that was almost always to preserve the remains of the wealthy, the well
yeah,
off, and so the average person, like Joseph
they're
of
in the
Arimathea.
necropolis.
Jesus got buried in the tomb of a wealthy man because
Yeah.
Joseph of Arimathea could afford, in a sense, his own. But you just didn't bury people in the desert sands at those times. The ground is
Yeah.
hard, it's rocky. So
Yeah.
almost all, it's like families in Judea would have their own like burial tomb, but it would be used and reused. In other words, you'd place a fresh body in there without a casket, and after the body decayed and all that were left were the bones, you would then take the bones and place them in an ossuary and then put
Right.
them on a shelf in that tomb, or even just pile the bones in the back end of the thing, and then
Right.
make ready for on the slab for the whatever next body would come in. And so that was a fairly common, but my point is simply that, you know the vast majority of human beings who ever lived have been buried in very, very naturalistic, simple ways.
Yeah, it's been complicated too, like as far as you and Leo being buried side by side on the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker Farm, that there's zoning now as far as where
Yeah.
a cemetery can be. Is it a designated cemetery? You can't just do it on the family plot, depending on the state and things. I guess
Well,
I know
that
you
my
also
name,
talked
yeah,
about
the
the Bond torches.
Harvey's Lake Borough would not want the poisonous and toxic leaching of my body into my neighbor's groundwater.
That's on embalmed. You're just going to leach toxic
Lest my
poison.
neighbors become as acerbic and assholish as I am
Oh, is that what might happen?
after they drink the toxic Larry water. But anyway, I'm
Sounds
getting
like a new
silly now.
comic book.
Yeah, anyway, let's move on from that ridiculousness to something very, very serious. You brought up the question of suicide, and I mentioned at the very beginning of this, it's apropos that we're doing this now and talking about issues of life and death as the holidays approach, because the holidays are a very, very, very difficult time for families that lost loved ones at the holiday season, or elderly widows and widowers, or people who have lost children who simply are remembering Thanksgivings or Christmases with that lost child, and so on. And you and I have both, you know, I had my dearest childhood friend, a guy from my neighborhood in Lincoln, Nebraska, about 15 years ago, drove to a park in Omaha and shot himself in the head. Family man, successful teacher, high school basketball coach, and so on.
Sorry.
Suffering from depression, and just one night drove to he had been on antidepressant drugs, and they couldn't get the drugs right, and they just kept changing his antidepressant drugs, and they put him on a new one, which made him suicidal. And he drove to a park in Omaha and shot himself in the head. It was gut wrenching for me. But then you just had a dear friend whose wife killed herself out on Vashon Island. And then you and I, very, very dear close friend in our parish, his 20-year-old son recently took his own life in very, very, very unexpected ways. And I think those suicides are even harder. The ones where you can almost understand a suicide when somebody's been battling depression their whole lives, or drug
Mm-hmm.
addiction their whole lives, or
Mm-hmm.
alcoholism their whole lives, or something horrific has happened to them, like the death of a child or something, or they have post-traumatic stress from being in war or whatever. But to lose a child when there were no warning signals,
Yeah.
nothing, just one day you wake up and your child has taken their life. I have a very dear Facebook friend. I've never met him. I've interviewed her on this show, Letitia Adams, Choa Adams, who many of you know. She had a book called I think Mary the Untier knots or something like that, of impossible causes. Oh gosh, I just remember the name of her book. But her son Anthony hung himself, and she's had to deal with the aftermath of that. It's just, and it's everywhere. It seems like you, and let's talk about. It seems like it's almost reached epidemic proportions in our culture, right?
It does. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm just one little sample size, and I don't, but it's increasing, for me. There've been a number over the years. But yeah, this last month, I was flying out to Vashon to do some work as well as attend the funeral of my friend John's, his wife. She was a mother of six, 52 years old. She had some tragedy. Their son, Mateo, died at the age of 5 months in a like a crib accident type of thing. And that was 15 years ago. And she'd struggled since then, but nobody saw this coming. And so seeing my friend John so raw, so raw, and his whole family at the funeral, his daughter basically holding him as though she was his wife or his mother, just because he's so broken. They're also
Yeah.
broken. And then, well, I was getting ready to go out, Larry. So I was flying out on Thursday morning, I think, and I went to mass beforehand. And then I told Father Bergman afterwards, okay, I'll see you later. I'm heading out for a week. And he just kind of looked still kind of ashen. And he told me that he spent, a few hours the night before with Jean and told me what happened. So I came back here and I was catching the flight in 2 hours and I finished the casket up and I just said, hey, if give this to the family. Um, so it's just on either side, I'm leaving here and I'm going there and I'm praying here for them and I'm
Yeah.
praying there for them. And so I've had, there've been a lot of young people. It's mostly been young people, young boys,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah. And
now that I think about it.
I was in the middle of a podcast. I can't even remember who. It was such a blur when your text came over my phone saying, that Jane's son had killed himself. Because, I will occasionally look down at my phone during a podcast to see, oh, okay, because sometimes it's, my father texted me or whatever about my mom, whatever. And I saw that. I almost couldn't finish the podcast. I was just so, and the reason we're not saying this in order to go through our own pain and grief here over a friend who was lost, but I'm sure there are people listening out there who know exactly what we're talking about: the shock, the pain, the surprise, the grief, the not understanding why someone would do this. That's the part, the aspect of, now to bring it back to your coffin making and why it is a ministry. And because, I mean, you gave our friend Gene a free casket for his son, to
Yeah.
be buried in, and that was huge. I mean, that's huge, because Gene doesn't have any money. We even took up a fundraising for him. But
Yeah.
anyway, you must run into this all the time, is my point, as a casket maker.
Yeah. Yeah. I give many to families for this, at least one a year, I'd say. Maybe not every year, maybe sometimes more than one a year. Oh, there've been, anyway, don't need to go into the stories, but um, yeah, and it seems, well, let's go a different way with this. As far as we were talking about the ministries that are flowing out of this parish, we have this beautiful liturgy at this parish. We have the PPC, we have the work here, the Divine Mercy Farm, Jerry's Divine Mercy Ministries. It seems that this
Jerry Bauman, yeah, and Phil Huffman's doctor
yeah,
ministry.
yeah. So it seems, well, what's happening at our parish is corporal works of mercy and spiritual works of mercy are flowing out of our parish. The desire to do these things, and it seems like there's an increasing desire to do that in a desire for a properly ordered life, because the disorder that we're seeing that's resulting in suicide is becoming more and more self-focused and internal and looking at it, and we're poisoning our kids with that, with a sense of focus on yourself, your status, your happiness, your pleasure, not happiness, your pleasure, your status, these things. But really, the antidote to depression, obviously, I'm not talking about like brain chemistry or things like that, but a lot of the sorrow we have that just comes from becoming more and more hyper focused on our own place, like our own pleasure seeking, our own place in the world, our own reputation in other people's eyes. that can all be put in its proper proportion by doing, I mean, it's Christ's admonition to lay down our lives. It's doing things for other people that is the antidote to the sadness of this passing world. And the sadness of this passing world is like on hyperdrive. I'm hoping it means that it's on its last legs, so that we're seeing a big flash right now with the suicide and with the depression and with the sorrow. I'm hoping that's because the enemy knows that time is short, and we're actually seeing something that is maybe turning around a little bit. And I think we're seeing it right here in our neighborhood here in Providence. We lived on this beautiful island. I said we went from paradise to Providence. You heard the siren go by outside. Like this is not the place that you move to from Vashon Island where there's orcas swimming in the water and everything, because you want the most idyllic lifestyle that is just the most pleasing, where you just say, don't we have, isn't everything wonderful? Isn't the coffee perfect? This is a place where sirens are going and there's trash blowing around and things, but the liturgy is beautiful and it's ordering our lives. And through that, we're being inspired to do works of mercy. And out of that is coming a happiness that the world doesn't give and it can't take away.
Oh God, that is so beautifully put. Yeah, that section of Scranton, Carrie and I used to have a second house there until we couldn't
I'm
afford it
hoping you'll
anymore.
get another one someday.
Yeah, I would love that.
We don't have as many dinners now.
But those. I mean, I used to have a second home in Scranton, one block from the parish. We bought it for $40,000. I was like to say we were now the proud owners of two really shitty houses, two really crappy homes, because our farm is also like the Haney place from Green Acres. I mean, it's just falling apart, ramshackle place, because we're Catholic workers. We don't have any money. And so we were able to cobble together enough money to buy this second house. But the reason why I bring this up is because we wanted to be closer to we're 50 minutes away from the parish. We wanted to be closer to it. We wanted to have a base of operations there. Oh, we also forgot to mention there's a homeschooling cooperative in that parish as well, that my wife ran for a couple of years, which also made this. But then we couldn't, as utilities went up and taxes went up, we couldn't afford the house anymore. So we sold it. So yeah, I would love to be able to but now housing prices have doubled and gone up and interest rates. I highly doubt we can afford that second house there, but that would be a goal someday. Yes, to have that second place there back in Scranton, because that's the point. The liturgy's not. We went there initially because we were interested in the liturgy. We'd read about the ordinary liturgy, and we went there and we found the liturgy to be beautiful. But to be quite honest, because it is 15 minutes away from us, we would have gone to that liturgy on a fairly regular basis, but now and then, off and on. We wouldn't have become active members of the parish were it not something beyond the liturgy, which is the pastor, the community of people that are there, the spirit of Christian evangelical zeal that exists in that parish. That's what kept us there. That's what kept us. The liturgy is beautiful and all, but that wouldn't have kept us. What kept us? And then to the last point, and then I'll let you talk and not dominate. But this goes to like our friend Gene, who just lost his son. As I said to Carrie, I cannot imagine what Gene's life would be like right now had he not been a member of our parish. And I mean, because as soon as this happened to him, to his son, and to him, our parish just came alive with mercy and compassion and forgiveness. We just enveloped him with love and support and all that. And what a difference that makes. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, I guess when I say the liturgy, I'm not even saying that it's because it's the ordinary liturgy, which is beautiful. It's because it is a properly ordered, disciplined celebration of the Eucharistic feast, that then we are fed and we are strengthened and we are ordered to some way. Where we see disorder, we want to bring that into order. So yes, it's not specifically the type of liturgy. It's that the belief and the effort are sincere, and so that orders things. And yes, the parish does reach out. Like I wasn't here. I was so sorry to be leaving at the same time, because I wanted to be here and I wanted to be a part of that prayer. I wanted to be at the funeral mass. I wanted to offer what I could offer. But there are just people are invested, like you coming up 50 minutes. It's not just specifically because of that, but just because, the community, when you start to feel like you have an actual parish family,
Yeah.
that the family, yeah, the word parish diminishes and the word family grows, and that is definitely it's definitely happening here. It's an interesting group of people, from different places and different backgrounds and different family sizes, different ages, different cultures, but yeah, there's just that overarching love and desire to serve God that 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 makes that brings the parts of the body into proper relation with each other that I haven't experienced before.
Yeah, I often say to people, I've never experienced it before. I mean, this is the greatest parish I've ever been involved in. And I don't know if it's got something to do with the fact that it's, about half the parish is a parish of converts.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
that in terms of numbers of parishioners, it's a relatively small parish,
Hmm.
making it a little more intimate or whatever. I'm sure that all plays a role. But there are also, and I know because I've interviewed some of them on this show, there are parishes out there, just standard old fashioned Novus Ordo
Yeah,
Catholic parishes, classic suburban parishes that are large, and you can feel anonymous in those parishes, in and out burger masses, as I call them, and yet those parishes, I know there are many of them, are alive, they're vibrant in a ways just like our parish. So it's possible even in a larger parish, in a suburban
definitely.
affluent. It's possible, but what it requires is a great pastor. Okay, I think uh,
Yeah,
you can have a vibrant laity in a parish, and that's great, and they can make a parish great all by themselves. Don't get me wrong, they can. But to make a parish truly great involves the coming together of a significant critical mass of devoted lay people with an effective and good pastor who supports that laity. And that's what we have at Thomas More, the greatest pastor I've ever had in my life, Father
how,
Eric Bergman.
how much do you think the fact that because it's an ordinary parish, the bishop is in Houston? I mean, this is no slight on Bishop Lopes, but just that Father Bergman actually has a lot more autonomy and a lot more ability to make decisions than I've experienced. When I was out in Seattle, we'd have ideas, go to the pastor, like, that sounds like a good idea. But go to the chancellery, and it would just hit
Yeah,
sludge. Like, we couldn't really affect, like, there was
yeah.
always something that anything to do with the property. We had 60 acres out there. We wanted to do a farm. We had all these, we were like, oh, this will be a big outreach to the community. But here, Father Bergman can kind of just say, let's do it.
Yeah, I think that's got part to do with it. It's got partly to do with the fact that he's a married priest with 10 kids. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying, I mean, I support celibacy for the clergy. I'm not advocating for a married clergy. But I think what it does, I mean, Father Bergman has autonomy, a certain level of autonomy. He's married and has family, so we can relate to that kind of. But I think beyond all of that, I mean, I can imagine if Father Bergman were unmarried and had a bishop living 3 doors down, we'd still have an effective parish
Yeah.
because he's just a great pastor. Uh, he's intelligent yet practical, and just in so many ways, and orthodox, obviously, and
Yeah.
deeply committed in so many ways. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. The fact is, the reason why I wanted to have this particular podcast with you is to not just highlight our parish for the sake of the parish and your coffin ministry and the Providence Pregnancy Center and Jerry Bauman's Divine Mercy thing and Phil Huffman's doctor ministry and Matt Nichols' farm and our
You got it all.
farm and the homeschooling cooperative
Okay.
and the whole, yeah, all those things. My point is that this is a model that can be exported to other parishes, and it's a model that other parishes are already doing. We don't need to export them. In other words,
Yeah.
there's a blueprint out there for doing this right.
Yeah. Yeah. The church has it. The answer to the disorder of the world. We just have to execute it.
Yeah, my friend Mike Baxter teaches at Notre Dame. He's a Catholic worker and started a Catholic worker house in South Bend, Indiana. So Baxter's always been an advocate to the extent that it's possible, and I think this is an idea that goes back to Dorothy Day and Peter Moore, that every parish, to the extent they can, should have a house of hospitality, should have at least a food pantry. One of my dreams would be, if I ever developed a second house in Scranton again, would be to have a sort of Catholic worker food pantry associated with our parish as well, because it is a poor neighborhood after
Yeah,
all.
that'd be great.
But anyway, I mean, so there's ideas out there, for doing these kinds of things.
Yeah, there's so much need, there's so much opportunity, and we know how to do it. We just have to band together. We're frequently so busy, or we make ourselves so busy with things that are not bringing us any happiness. They're not important, but we fill our time with things that are just getting in the way.
This is key. This is key, and we probably should wrap this up pretty soon. But one of the common complaints that I hear pastors make all the time is that we talk, in a synodal church doing synodal things, it should be more laity driven, lay people doing synodal things. And yet the fact is, as most pastors will admit, I'd love to have lay people doing things. I would love to have lay people
Yeah.
doing XYZ
Yeah.
and ABC and blah, 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 blah. Try and get them to do it. Because every
Yeah.
single time you approach a parishioner, you almost hate. It's like pins and needles approaching it. Could you please possibly think about running our Christmas giving tree this year? sorry. I know, because the routinely they come back and say, "Oh, I'm busy. I'm busy. I'm busy. I'm
Yeah.
busy." What is it? Therefore, I mean, in other words, and I have an article coming out very shortly in the What We Need Now Substack, in which it's an article on voluntary poverty. It's an article on a little bit on Dorothy Day and voluntary poverty. But one of the things that most vexes the American Catholic Church and the church in the West in general is its affluence, is that we have ignored almost completely the warnings of our Lord against the accumulation of wealth, the pursuit of wealth, that you cannot serve both God and money, or mammon, as he called it. Now, this is not a blanket condemnation of what my point is that I make in the article, is that what Christ is really saying is that in order to be focused on God, you have to have a simplicity of life. This is the essence of voluntary poverty. Why is it religious orders emphasize voluntary poverty? Why is it Benedictine monasteries emphasize poverty? Because there is a direct link between poverty and simplicity of life, and therefore focusing on God. Therefore, my argument would be that one of the areas where a parish needs to focus on in terms of being a vital, vibrant parish is to get lay people to refocus their own priorities and their own energies away from annual trips to Disney World and all that kind of garbage. Disney World's the Antichrist anyway. Disney's the Antichrist as far as I'm concerned. But I don't want to go there. But so you get my point. All right. If you're too busy to give of yourself in your parish, then you're too busy.
Yeah. Well, this is what I think one of the things that's very good about here at St. Thomas More too, is because a lot of times if you get young families that are zealous for the faith, they are going to be too busy because they're going to have lots of kids that they are trying to raise and care for. But eventually those kids will grow up and then they'll have more time to put in. So if you have a parish that has multi ages and some people are single, and some people can't have children, whatever it might be, plugging in different ways, because that I think has been like when we had young kids, it's strange because when we were a lot younger, I think of like the volunteers at parishes frequently being retired people or whatever. But I used to cut the grass. I used to do all when I only had one or two or three children. But then it got kind of to the point where it was like, we have a lot of kids and we don't need to be, uber rich, but where's the security level? Where's that balance and everything? And when kids, it could just scramble it more because suddenly the college happens again and again and again. So you don't even really know exactly what you need from time to time. But I think you're right when it comes to stuff that are like extravagant expenditures, because who really comes back from Disneyland feeling refreshed? But a good night's sleep after working hard to do something good and seeing that you're bringing some satisfaction or some comfort into somebody else's life who really needs it, that'll
Yeah.
have you sleeping well at night. But Disneyland, you'll be waking up startled with fears that the Matterhorn broke when your kids were on the middle of it or whatever it was. And that just they actually add tension some of those vacations. So you're right. Instead of thinking like, how do we all live like the way Dorothy Day and Peter Morin said, even if we have families and we have all these unknown factors, rather, how do we vacate? How do we spend maybe our leisure time in a way that is building up the kingdom and doing good for others? And then that actually will paradoxically come back to us and give us what we most need, which is refreshment and peace.
Amen, brother. Amen. And I've often thought about writing a blog post called, going to Disney World is a mortal sin. But I refrain from doing that simply because I don't think that's true. And
What a
I think
conscience you have. Good job.
I think that would be false. But we could there's yeah anyway that's a whole nother episode that I could talk about why I loathe and despise Disney World. And I don't mean just even before Disney went all woke and gay and all that
Oh,
kind of stuff. I mean, my former students from DeSales, some of whom might be listening to this, remember from 25, 30 years ago when I first started DeSales in 1994. Disney was one of my bete noirs, one of my common jokes in class to go after Disney as the Antichrist. But we, we
well, long lines and sun. That's enough for me right there.
yeah, well, yeah. It's when I went on It's a Small World ride with my daughter, and I realized I wanted to kill Pinocchio. That, that I realized
Something was
there's
amiss.
something is not right with my reaction to Disney World. Anyway, that's we're kind of ending on a frivolous note here, but
As we sometimes do.
the point being a simplicity of life. That's the kind of point to bring it back, simplicity of life. And I understand the thing about okay, you've got 6, 7 young kids at home. You're going to be busy. I'm not in a sense saying, well, shame on you for prioritizing your kids over being active in the parish, bazaar or whatever, the Monte Carlo night. Which those sorts of things. No, but there's a way of incorporating. The more your children are incorporated into the
Yeah.
parish, the more attending to your children will involve also attending to your parish.
Excellent point.
And the problem was we've compartmentalized, especially in suburban Catholic life, we've compartmentalized the parish as just one lifestyle object amongst many to which we expose our children. And then we wonder why at confirmation becomes the sacrament of emancipation from the faith instead of final initiation
Right.
into the faith, because your children have been exposed to the faith as a compartmentalized object, and not as part of the warp and woof of your very family life. That's for 50 minutes on a Sunday we do that, and then it's off to the diner for breakfast or whatever, and it doesn't permeate anything else, and because we're busy and we have other things to do,
Yeah.
and so we don't get involved. Meanwhile, your child has every video game on the face of the earth and an
Yeah.
iPhone, and goes to every damn secular event on the face of the earth, but you would never ever ever dream of making sure your children are more directly incorporated into the parish life. And that means having the parish be part of your own life on a more
Yeah.
constitutive and foundational level. And of course, there's no one size fits all solution to how you finesse that. It's more art than science. But this is all I'm saying, because
But
I'm speaking from background. When I grew up, I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and my parents were Catholics. I'm a cradle Catholic, but it was of that
yeah.
compartmentalized sort,
Yeah.
very, very compartmentalized. So I
And
know
I
what
think
I'm.
I think St. Thomas More is doing a good job of trying to have lots of things happening throughout the week that people can come in and out of and be a part of where they fit, and so that it is more of a part of the rhythm of the week and of the month and of the year than it would be if it was just Sundays.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Anyways, okay, we should probably wrap this up. Any last words, Macus? Macus, I call him Macus instead of Marcus because when I signed the copy of my book that he had purchased at the book signing, I misspelled his name as Macus. So,
I
so
think yeah, that was I had purchased that book online too because then you did a book sign in a local bookstore, and I came in and I they were going to sell me the book, and then I broke it out and I realized that's probably kind of offensive to go into a book signing at a bookstore and bring your own copy of the book. Probably part of the reason they do that is to actually sell the books. So you got even by not even knowing who I was and misspelling my name in there, and then naming a goat after me to boot.
yes, one of our buck goats is now named Macus. So in your honor.
Well, my last words are, and I hope these aren't my last words because I haven't thought about them at all, and I hope I'll give my epitaph a little more consideration. But just thanks, Larry, for all that you've done to sort of generate an awareness of the way that the church can and should work, and how much of that has come out of your participation in St. Thomas More and the good stuff that's happened here and your teaching career and all that. It's helped bring order into our lives, and then help me to expand what I'm doing out in my family and out into the East Coast with my business. So it just seems like whatever my last words would be, anybody who's feeling an impulse to do something for Christ, whatever it is, in a big way or a small way, or just a first step and something that might turn into something more, do it, because I think this is a really great time. I think we've been given again, I'm not any great fan of a political party that says, well, he thought she was 18. But I don't think that's like our savior. That's our saving political party.
Yeah.
It's not. But in some ways, maybe we've been given a little bit of a reprieve where we can still proclaim Christ loud and clear in different, interesting, and unique ways to a culture that desperately needs to hear his name. So
Oh,
thanks.
amen. Amen. And everyone should go check out mariancaskets.com, right? Is it mariancaskets.com?
That's it.
All right.
Marian, Blessed Mother, MarianCaskets.com. She was the perfect vessel, the beautiful vessel that Christ chose to come into this world in. And we're trying to make beautiful vessels for us to go out and meet him in.
And I'll put that in the program notes. All right. Hey, thanks, Marcus, for coming on the show today. And I'm doing an interview on the Matt Fradd show next week. That interview will show up probably in 2 or 3 months. But Marcus and I will be traveling to.
We're road tripping. Maybe we do a road diary.
Yeah, we'll do. Maybe we'll do a road diary as we head out to Matt Fradd land. Anyway, more on that later. Hey, thanks everyone for listening, and thank you, Marcus, for being here today.
Thanks a lot.
Bye now. Bye.